It wasn't clear to us listening what the government's position is on the CPP. Are you committed to staying in it long term?
Yeah, that's our intent. We haven't been looking at or even considering or had a discussion around Saskatchewan exiting the CPP plan. That we have been quite happy with the Canada Pension Plan and how it served the residents of Saskatchewan, and would hope that would continue. That being said, there's an active discussion that's in its very infancy or early stages in Alberta, and so we need to watch what is happening, as any province can pull out at. If they should choose. And Alberta's, I would say, a long way from making that decision. But they are having a look at the impact of the CPP there. And so from Saskatchewan's perspective, we've been happy, and I think the CPP has provided a great value, not only to all Canadians, but to Saskatchewan residents. And so we have no discussions, nor are we planning to have any discussions on pulling out.
With Premier Smith in the notion that whatever they do does affect us, maybe not as directly, but certainly does, certainly with the number of people going over the border.
Yeah, the impact would be much larger, I think, probably to other Canadians as opposed to us in Saskatchewan. And we will be talking to Premier Smith about a number of issues as we're going to find our way to Halifax this weekend for a Council of Federation meeting. We'll be talking about healthcare, and we'll also be talking about the carbon tax crisis that the federal government has created with the inequities of how that's being charged across Canada currently.
What could the implications be of Alberta leaving CPP?
Well, again, that's some of what we're just looking at now. And again, I think this is in the very infancy of that discussion. I was listening to their finance minister in an interview last evening where he said what they're doing right now is actually talking to Albertans about the pros and cons of the CPP from an Alberta perspective, and that's a good discussion to have, I think, regardless of what the program is. And so I'll be speaking to Premier Smith. Saskatchewan's position is the CPP has treated Saskatchewan residents well, and we have no plans to have a discussion about changing our relationship with them.
Conversation that you think you're going to have with her is going to be, look, this creates problems for us in general. This is something that you need maybe to look at.
Yeah, I don't even know yet if we know what the consequences would be on Saskatchewan or potentially other provinces as well. And so we're actually looking at that right now. And so I think at this point, my discussion with Premier Smith, or the question I'd have, is exactly what she's looking at as far as timelines, as far as potential, on this discussion, and as we do on others. So, not a very deep discussion at this point.
What do you think she is looking at, sir?
I don't know. I know they're looking, just from the interview I saw with their Minister of Finance last night, looking at having that discussion on the pros and cons from an Alberta perspective with Albertans, and that's a fair discussion.
Have you ever had a conversation with her or anybody else in Alberta about this to this point?
No.
Are you concerned about the long-term implications? Like, even if this isn't something that's going to happen down the road, should people in Saskatchewan be concerned about Alberta moving out and potentially the dominoes of this?
Yeah, I don't know. What we're trying to figure out is what would those implications be, as we don't know today. I heard Nate Horner, the Minister of Finance, mention last night that there's 3 net contributors to the CPP plan, and so we're assessing as to who they are, what that looks like, and ultimately what any potential impact to Saskatchewan would be if a province like Ontario or Alberta or anyone else decided to do what Quebec has already done in going their own way when it comes to their pension plan. And so I don't know that we know what those impacts to Saskatchewan residents would be. What we do know is that the CPP has been a solid foundation for retirement living here in Saskatchewan over the course of the last number of years, and moving forward, we want to ensure that's the case in the next number of years and decades.
What's your priority for the conference?
Carbon tax crisis and the inequities that the federal government has put forward with their decision to exempt heating fuel, which largely exempts Atlantic Canadians from paying the carbon tax on how they heat their homes by that very standard. When you start to extend this conversation, the first point I would say is that should be extended to all heating fuels and to all Canadians. We have largely we're natural gas in Saskatchewan. 40% of their bills is the carbon tax that Saskatchewan families are paying, and so in the eye of being fair to all families in this province and across Canada, our number one ask and our advocacy at the table will be for premiers to ask the federal government to be fair to those Canadian families and extend that to all forms of heating fuel. That would include in Saskatchewan propane, electric heat, which many of our northern communities, our Indigenous communities also utilize. And so what was a policy that we've always agreed with and took to the Supreme Court of Canada outside of Quebec largely has been applied relatively equally and fairly across the nation up until this last week. Now, what is a policy that we still disagree with, the entire carbon taxation policy? We believe it's creating a carbon tax crisis and part of our affordability crisis in this province. But what that policy that we still disagree with is now most certainly being applied unfairly in the nation of Canada, and I don't think anybody can argue that.
What if they were to provide an exemption based on income? Because part of the argument is that lower income people that use heating oil, that it's unaffordable, it costs more. What if that were to be a compromise?
Well, I think part of the argument that they put forward as well is that we should elect more Liberals in the prairie provinces if we want an exemption. And what I would suggest is that we should actually elect less Liberals across Canada, and I think that would solve our problem just as quickly. The fact of the matter is that this policy has been put in not with an eye to affordability depending on your income. It's been put in with an eye to how they can retain some of their seats in Atlantic Canada, and I would say that even Atlantic Canadians are seeing right through this policy. Then I would remind Atlantic Canadians that it's a Trudeau-Singh coalition that has brought this policy to you in the first place.
You mentioned this sort of unfair implementation of the carbon tax. Do you suppose that exemption, if it sort of remains the way it is and the federal government doesn't make any further changes as you've suggested, do you think that sort of changes the legal landscape of, like including the Supreme Court's ruling about this? And
it may very well. As part of the Supreme Court ruling, Justice Wagner, I believe, discussed the fact that in order to use the POG powers in order to put the carbon tax in place, that one of the parameters is that it be introduced fairly from coast to coast to coast in the nation. That's not the case today. And by these very same metrics, it really opens up a discussion around the carbon tax being charged on, on other utilities that we're utilizing in our homes. By the same metric of pausing the carbon tax when it comes to home heating fuel in Atlantic Canada, when you look at how we're generating electricity that we're using in our homes, that same argument of a carbon tax pause could be made as well. And so the Liberals most certainly have made a decision that's a purely partisan political decision to save a few of their seats in Atlantic Canada. Even Atlantic Canadians, I think, are seeing through that, as it is this very government that has brought this carbon tax crisis to their community and to their home. And what we would say is let's lessen that just a little bit by doing the right thing. Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, the decision is yours. Let's be fair to all Canadian families, and let's eliminate a portion of this carbon tax crisis that you've created.
Is 5-minute warning. Is there a peace order and good government legal argument for you to advance? Because this is all framed around the notion that what you're doing is illegal, which we can have a conversation about. But from one perspective, from the peace order and good government standpoint, it would almost seem as if you have a counter-legal argument to make in relation to the arguments that previously discussed.
Yeah, and I would say it'd be premature to comment on that. What we're doing is essentially making a decision for Saskatchewan families that mirrors the decision that the federal government has made for Atlantic Canadian families. We are saying that we are going to, if they will not, we are not going to quit collecting the carbon tax on how they heat their homes. The way for this to ultimately, I would say the right thing to do by Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh is to treat all Canadian families fairly, treat all Canadian families uniformly, and remove the carbon tax as they have done in Atlantic Canada across the nation on all home heating sources. There's a debate going to happen today in the Federal Assembly, of which there's just a unanimous vote. I believe it was unanimous. I'm not sure about the independent member. I believe it was a unanimous vote that will in support of actually the opposition bill, Pierre Poilievre's bill, that's on the floor of the Parliament, our federal Parliament, that will be debated later today, which states exactly that: remove the carbon tax, not only from home heating fuel, but from all heating sources across the nation. That's a fair thing to do.
Could you speak to the slippery slope legal argument? Because one supposes that if the decision's made that Saskatchewan doesn't want to collect this tax because of its relative unfairness, people in this province can say, well, is it fair? The farmers get special tax consideration on fuel and such. That's come up. What's your response?
I can't speak specifically to it because we're actually looking into that right now as to, does this change the legal stance and the entire carbon tax situation? What I would say is, one, Saskatchewan government is making the same decision that the federal government has made, and how would you deem that to be illegal? What I would say is that most certainly what is happening here with what we have always believed is the wrong policy to address a challenge that we have across Canada and around the world, outside of Quebec, has been relatively fairly applied. Today it's still the wrong policy, not being fairly applied, and no one can say it is. By the very metrics that the federal government has put forward, it does open up the conversation. Do we want to mirror this type of policy when it comes to electrical generation, for example, understanding that we get electricity from different sources, like we heat our homes with different sources across the nation. And so the federal government certainly needs to level the playing field and be fair to all Canadian families when it comes to heating our homes, and then we can have the discussion around how we are generating our electricity and being fair in that regard as well.
How important is it for the other provinces to join with you and stick together in this carbon tax revolt?
Well, I think you'll see the majority of the provinces, like you did in the very original carbon tax case that went to the Supreme Court of Canada, are going to be supportive of the federal government making a decision that ultimately is fair to all Canadian families. I think you'll see leadership in Atlantic Canada see how important that is. How you build a nation is by treating Canadians fairly from coast to coast to coast, understanding the diversity of each area. That is not what our federal coalition government has done today. What they have done is added to the affordability crisis, but created a carbon tax crisis in this nation. That's what we'll be discussing Monday with all of the premiers when we arrive. We'll be discussing healthcare as well, which was the original plan. But what we will most certainly be discussing is this carbon tax crisis that has been created by this federal coalition government. And I think you will see a large number, if not all, of the premiers asking for fairness for the families that they represent in their specific region of the nation.